Zaraki Kenpachi is a one-of-a-kind character in Bleach. On the surface, he functions as the archetypal Blood Knight. He lives and breathes to revel in battle, a man defined by the act of fighting. And in this regard, he is incredibly effective. When it comes to sheer rawness, not many characters in all of manga can compare with the Gorte 13's captain of Squad 11, which makes him an incredibly entertaining man to follow whenever he appears to wreak havoc. But of course, there is more to Kenpachi than just pure, unadulterated rawness. In fact, I'd argue that Kenpachi might just be one of the most impressively written characters in all of Bleach. Not because he's symbolically loaded, not because of his methodical construction, and not because he's so fucking cool. Kenpachi thrives as much as he does by virtue of the world and power system that Kubo has intricately crafted for this story. He's a character that's almost entirely developed through subtext, with crucial aspects of his character hidden behind the several laws of the universe. Like most characters in this story, he is a victim of the past, grieving over the death of a loved one. Despite me referring to this individual as Zaraki Kenpachi over 5 times so far, this man has no name. That might just be one of the most essential details of the character. Names, in theory, constitute one's identity. You are what you are known as, and in the case of Bleach's Blood Knight, he has no name. He has no identity, at least not at first. So he earns a name through battle. Zaraki is the name of his hometown in the 80th district of the Rokongai, the outermost and most dangerous area in the slums of the Soul Society. Kenpachi is the title he earned by rising up the ranks of the Gorte 13, more of an identifier than an actual name to refer to the captain of the 11th squad. Thus, he is literally the Kenpachi from Zaraki. But before he claimed this prestigious title that signifies the strongest Shinigami, he was a nobody. As a young boy living in this lawless region, he came across the dead body of a Shinigami. This Shinigami had yet to impart his soul upon his blade, which meant the sword lying beside his corpse was an Asauchi. The nameless boy took that nameless blade for himself, and over time, imparted his own soul upon it, making a Zanpakuto. With this blade, he became a monster, killing opponent after opponent until finally he met his match, Yachiru Unohana, the first Kenpachi. A woman feared across the entire realm for her unparalleled strength in battle. A woman who had grown bored with the sword, with fighting, simply because she had grown too powerful for any adversary to even compare, until finally she met her match. Zaraki and Unohana were immediately drawn to one another, bound to each other by the mutual pleasure they found in fighting. This was the pinnacle for them, the greatest feeling they could ever experience, to revel in battle to the fullest. For Kenpachi, this was the first time he felt fear, the first time he ever struggled in battle, yet still he was stronger than her. And so to savor this moment of pure ecstasy, to ensure that it will never end, he subconsciously suppresses his own power. From their first meeting and onward, Kenpachi unknowingly places both physical and mental barriers upon himself to prevent him from surpassing her. Stunting his own growth, he descends from that ceiling of power he was destined for, the ceiling that Kubo consistently likens to enlightenment, the complete understanding of the self. What sets Kenpachi apart from other characters in the story is the fact that his journey begins with him much further along on the path to enlightenment than anybody else. But he regresses due to this fateful encounter, and it would take decades, if not centuries, for him to even reach that position once more, let alone transcend it. That was Unohana's sin, to have robbed this child of his potential. And Kenpachi still kills Yachiru, despite suppressing himself to prevent exactly that. Yachiru Unohana, who dedicated herself to battle, was killed by the prospect of a mere child who outclassed her, and thus Retsu was born, who dedicated herself to ensuring that child would return to what he once was. Everything that follows this moment in Kenpachi's life is a constant quest to return to the child he once was, to revel in battle and surpass his ceiling time and time again, in hopes of finding a match like Unohana and savoring that taste he learnt of as a child once more. He inches closer to the monster he once was every time he is pushed to his limits. In a way, Kenpachi overcomes his grief over the death of Yachiru through the thrill of fighting, by chasing the pinnacle of battle he knows too well. Suppressing his power in hopes of extending his battles is not limited to his first near-death experience, but every battle that follows, as he places bells on the points of his hair to give his opponent a reactionary advantage, as well as an eye patch that feeds on his Reiatsu. For Kenpachi, battle is everything, and if limiting himself will extend this joy, so be it. But those aforementioned handicaps don't even come close to Kenpachi's most significant self-imposed constraint: the failure to recognize his Zanpakuto, the denial of the extension of his own soul. What's interesting about this is that despite denying his Zanpakuto out of pure snobbery and confidence in his own power, the blade still manifests into his closest friend, a young girl he unknowingly conjured into existence who simply touches his blade in response to his question of where she came from. A young girl he named after the woman he admires most, as up until that point, they were the only two people to have shown no fear towards his blade. The number one espada functions as a thematic foil to Kenpachi, men left isolated due to their extreme power, yearning for bonds, to form a heart with somebody who empathizes with their struggle. Like Kenpachi, Stark split and materialized his soul to fill the void of loneliness, albeit for slightly different reasons. After suffering from what is presumably his first ever defeat besides the one against Unohana, Kenpachi finally begins to change. He begins to express a desire to bond with his Zanpakuto after years of neglect and selfishly depending on his own power, failing to recognize that his Zanpakuto is part of him. His dynamic with Yachiru manifests in several ways, as Yachiru literally means 8,000 styles. Unohana named herself aptly, as she mastered countless ways of fighting with the sword. What better name to define the Kenpachi, the strongest Shinigami? Yachiru is the token of battle Kenpachi strives to reach, the subject of his grief, and the extension of his soul, intrinsically tied to his existence as the sword he has finally tried to open up to. And that brings us to the most important moment of Kenpachi's life, the day he finally receives the pleasure of tasting true battle once more. The day Unohana's purpose is fulfilled and Kenpachi returns to the boy he once was. Every squad in the Gote 13 has an insignia in the form of a flower which contains some symbolic importance in correspondence with their nature. Squad 11's insignia is the yarrow flower. In Greek mythology, the yarrow is said to have been bathed in the legendary hero Achilles to grant him immortality. In fighting against the first captain of Squad 11, the first Kenpachi, Zaraki is granted power akin to immortality. This can be seen in the makeup of the battle, with Unohana pushing Zaraki to the brink of death and then healing him countless times. With her powers and with her life, Unohana restores Kenpachi to that all-powerful child he once was. It was Unohana who robbed him of that power, and it is Unohana who returns him to that power at the cost of her life. Fitting for a brutal killer who was reborn as a tender healer. To emphasize this moment of transcendence, the blade he so desperately wishes to partner with, the blade that has been by his side longer than anyone, calls out to him in acceptance. And it is against the child who can actualize anything he imagines that Kenpachi truly reaches that state of enlightenment. A child who was locked up due to being terrifyingly powerful, much like Kenpachi who was refused training in Zanjutsu out of fear of the even greater monster he could become. Gremi revels in childlike fascination with battle, finally free of imprisonment and given the chance to act actually fight. Meeting Kenpachi fills him with almost the exact same sensation Kenpachi felt upon meeting Unohana. Gremmy considered himself the strongest of the Stern Ritter simply because everybody steered clear of him, but his strength was never put to the test. What better way than facing off against the strongest Shinigami who exist in polarity with the Quincy to determine whether this claim is valid or not. Facing off against Gremmy is the perfect trial for Kenpachi also, taking the ethereal nature of his battle against Unohana to even greater extremes. His enemy is a child enamored by the thrill of finally fighting to his heart's content, who ultimately meets his demise as a result of his own short-sightedness. He tried to be as strong as Kenpachi in order to kill him, but being as strong as Kenpachi is exactly what killed him. From the heat of battle and the ecstasy he felt due to it, he failed to navigate the flurry of thoughts that materialize by way of his power. And who can blame him? There is an established limit to Gremmy's imagination in the fact that creating a double doubles the capacity of his imagination. In doing so, he summons a meteor, which doesn't work. He goes even further, multiplying himself and his capacity for imagination, summoning a void of outer space that wraps around Kenpachi. That also doesn't work. It's no secret that Bleach places a heavy emphasis on the importance of remaining calm in battle. Powers are interlinked with the soul, and a lack of focus interferes with one's performance. Kenpachi has achieved a state of equanimity, complete composure in hopes of reaching enlightenment. He knows who he is, he knows what he wants, and he knows what he is capable of. That is why he can cut through space itself, while his opponent, in his childish ignorance, struggles to maintain his composure and lashes out in a self-destructive fit of rage. Kenpachi proved himself as the stronger of the two, and simply by doing so, he defeated his opponent. What better way to underscore Kenpachi's enlightenment, the summit of his potential, than to defeat an individual who can turn their imagination into reality by simply flexing his power. Gremmy failed to imagine a way of killing him. The idea of a man with such strength being killed was inconceivable to him. That is the level of power Kenpachi has achieved. Unfortunately, in order to reach this summit and achieve his true power, Kenpachi had to lose the two most important people to him, both known as Yachiru. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video. If this analysis feels incomplete, that's because it is. There's a lot more to be said about Gremmy, about Kenpachi, about his Bankai, and the implications of Yachiru being his Zanpakuto spirit. I want to save that stuff for a future video. Gremmy may get his own individual video, and the Bankai stuff hopefully will be covered around the time when that material is adapted into the anime, which is like 2 years from now, but I wanted to make this video spoiler free for any anime onlys. With that being said, have an amazing day, and I'll catch you in the next one.